The sound of shattering glass echoed through the silver-dollar saloon, followed by a woman's laughter that rang louder than the piano in the corner. Pearl Wilson stood defiantly amidst the broken shards, her emerald eyes blazing with the same fire that had earned her a reputation throughout Copper Creek, Arizona Territory, 1885. "That's the third glass this week, Pearl," bellowed Hank Morgan, the saloon owner, his face flushed with frustration. "I swear, girl, you're too loud, too wild, and far too much trouble for any decent establishment." Pearl tossed her copper-colored hair over her shoulder, unrepentant. "The man grabbed what wasn't his to touch. I simply educated him on proper manners." Her voice carried across the room, causing several patrons to chuckle appreciatively while others shook their heads in disapproval. At 24, Pearl had heard it all before. Too loud, too opinionated, too much trouble. The words followed her like persistent flies on a summer day, buzzing in her ears until she'd almost come to believe them herself. Almost. She bent down to help clean the mess, her calico dress swishing around her ankles. As the daughter of the town's late schoolteacher, she'd been raised with books and ideas that most frontier women never encountered. Her father had taught her to speak her mind, a gift that had become a burden after his passing 3 years ago. The batwing doors of the saloon swung open, momentarily framing a tall figure against the harsh afternoon sun. The piano player faltered, and conversations died as Samuel Stone Callahan stepped into the room. His weathered Stetson cast shadows across features that had earned him his nickname hard, immovable, yet with an unexpected elegance to them, like a sculpture carved from the mountains themselves. Pearl had heard of Stone Callahan. Everyone in 3 counties had. The ranch foreman from the Rocking M spread was known for his quiet authority, impeccable word, and the fact that he rarely frequented establishments like the Silver Dollar unless absolutely necessary. "Mr. Morgan." Stone's voice was deep but not loud. Somehow it carried anyway. "Got that message from Mr. McAllister about the cattle drive?" Hank nodded vigorously, reaching beneath the counter. "Right here, Mr. Callahan. Says he needs 20 more men than planned on account of the Apache sightings near the pass." Stone nodded, taking the folded paper. His eyes, the color of storm clouds, briefly met Pearl's before sliding away. She felt a peculiar flutter in her chest and immediately chastised herself for it. Men like Stone Callahan didn't look twice at women like her women who didn't know their place, as the town was so fond of reminding her. "Need anything else while you're here?" Hank asked. Stone hesitated, then gestured toward a table. "Coffee, if you have it. Been riding since dawn." As Hank bustled to prepare the coffee, Pearl finished gathering the glass shards and stood. She should return to her duties serving drinks, deflecting wandering hands and trying to maintain some dignity while earning enough to keep a roof over her head. Since her father's death, options for a woman alone had been limited, especially one with her reputation. "Miss Wilson," Hank called. "Take Mr. Callahan his coffee, and for heaven's sake, try not to drop it." Pearl bristled at his tone but took the steaming mug and made her way to Stone's table. The cowboy had removed his hat, revealing dark hair with a slight wave to it. Up close, she noticed the fine lines around his eyes, not from age, as he couldn't be much past 30, but from squinting against the relentless western sun. "Your coffee, Mr. Callahan," she said, setting it down carefully. "Much obliged." He didn't look up immediately, busy unfolding the message from McAllister. When he did raise his eyes, Pearl was startled by their directness. Most men either leered or avoided looking at her altogether. Stone Callahan simply observed, as if seeing her clearly. "You're Jonathan Wilson's daughter," he said. It wasn't a question. Pearl straightened. "I am." He was a good man, Taught me to read properly when I first came to these parts. The simple acknowledgement of her father brought a lump to Pearl's throat. Thank you. Not many remember him that way anymore. Stone took a sip of his coffee. People have short memories for the good things, long ones for the bad. Before Pearl could respond, the doors burst open again. 3 cowboys from the rival Diamond T Ranch stumbled in, already half drunk and looking for more trouble than refreshment. "Well, look who it is," drawled the tallest one, a man named Pike with a scar running down his cheek. Stone faced Callahan and the loudmouth schoolteacher's girl. Pearl turned to walk away, but Pike caught her arm. "Where you rushing off to, Red? Too good to talk to paying customers." Stone's voice cut through the tension like a knife. "Let go of the lady, Pike." "Lady?" Pike laughed, but his hand dropped from Pearl's arm. "This one. Town gossip says she's nothing but trouble, too wild for her own good." Pearl felt her cheeks burn with humiliation and anger. The worst part was knowing that half the saloon probably agreed with him. Stone stood slowly, a deliberate movement that somehow carried more threat than if he'd jumped to his feet. "Seems to me a man who needs to force his company on a woman is the one who's too much trouble." His voice remained even, conversational almost, but something in it made Pike take a step back. "Just having some fun, Callahan. No need to get riled." "I'm not riled, just finishing my coffee." Stone's gaze was unwavering. "Which I'd like to do in peace." The moment stretched taut as a wire before Pike shrugged with exaggerated nonchalance. "Come on, boys. Place has gone downhill anyway." After they'd slunk out, Pearl realized she was still standing beside Stone's table, clutching her serving tray like a shield. "Thank you," she said quietly, "but I could have handled it." The corner of Stone's mouth lifted slightly. "I don't doubt it, Miss Wilson. But my mother taught me some manners, unlike that sorry excuse for a cowpoke." Pearl couldn't help but smile. "Your mother would be proud. She'd be prouder if I remembered to get a haircut before coming to town." He finished his coffee and stood, placing his hat back on his head. "Good day, Miss Wilson." Pearl watched him leave, the slightest swagger in his step betraying his cowboy profession. In the vacuum of his departure, the whispers started again. She could feel them like tiny barbs against her skin, always causing a scene. That temper will be the death of her. Too much trouble for any decent man. Pearl lifted her chin and returned to work. She'd survived worse than whispers, after all, and she'd learned long ago not to put stock in momentary kindness from men passing through, even ones with storm-gray eyes who remembered her father with respect. The next day dawned clear and bright, the kind of autumn morning that made the desert gleam like polished copper. Pearl rose early as always, before the town was fully awake. These quiet hours belonged to her, a precious time when she could almost pretend she was free of judgment and expectations. She lived in a small adobe house at the edge of town, the last remnant of her former life with her father. Keeping it had required taking the job at the saloon, but Pearl considered the trade worthwhile. Within these walls, surrounded by her father's books and her mother's few remaining possessions, she could be herself without apology. After heating water on the stove, Pearl washed and dressed in one of her 2 good dresses, a practical blue cotton with just enough embellishment to feel respectable. Today, she would visit Maggie Sullivan at the general store, one of the few people in town who treated her with genuine kindness. Pearl had promised to help inventory the new shipment of goods that had arrived on yesterday's stage. As she locked her door and set off toward Main Street, Pearl noticed a small crowd gathered outside the telegraph office. In a town like Copper Creek, such gatherings usually meant news and not often the good kind. "What's happening?" she asked Mrs. Hennessy, the milliner's wife, who stood at the edge of the group. The older woman sniffed disapprovingly but answered anyway. Apache raid on the Peterson place last night, took their horses and supplies. Mr. Peterson got shot trying to stop them. Pearl's heart sank. Is he still alive? Last anyone heard. Stone Callahan found him this morning and brought him to Doc Walker. Before Pearl could ask more questions, the crowd parted as Sheriff Davis emerged from the telegraph office. Behind him walked Stone Callahan, his expression grim and his clothes still dusty from the trail. "I've wired Fort Bowie," the sheriff announced. "They're sending a patrol. In the meantime, everyone should stay alert but calm. No need for panic." "What about the cattle drive?" someone called out. "McAllister's men are supposed to head out tomorrow." "That's for McAllister to decide," Sheriff Davis replied. "Though I'd advise postponing until we know the situation better." As the crowd began to disperse, Pearl found herself face to face with Stone. His eyes looked even more shadowed than yesterday, and she noticed a dark stain on his sleeve that could only be blood. "Mr. Callahan," she said quietly, "I heard you found Mr. Peterson. That was fortunate." "Not fortunate enough," he replied, his voice rough with fatigue. "He'd been lying there most of the night, lost a lot of blood." Pearl hesitated, then asked, "Are you all right? You look like you could use some rest yourself." Something flickered in his expression, surprise perhaps at her concern. "I'm fine, Miss Wilson. Just need to get back to the ranch and let McAllister know what's happened." "Of course." She stepped aside to let him pass, but Stone remained where he was, studying her face as if trying to solve a puzzle. "You be careful," he said finally. "Town will be on edge for a while. People get foolish when they're scared." The warning held genuine concern, and Pearl felt that same flutter in her chest she'd experienced in the saloon. "I'm always careful, Mr. Callahan." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Somehow I doubt that." He tipped his hat and walked toward the livery stable, his spurs making a soft, jingling rhythm on the packed dirt street. Pearl continued to the general store, but her thoughts remained with the taciturn cowboy, who had twice now treated her with unexpected consideration. It was probably nothing, she told herself. Stone Callahan seemed the type to be decent to everyone, even women the rest of the town considered too troublesome to respect. Maggie Sullivan greeted Pearl with a warm hug when she entered the store. At 45, Maggie had the comfortable roundness of a woman who enjoyed her own cooking and the sharp eyes of someone who missed nothing. "There you are. I was beginning to think you'd heard about the Peterson place and decided to stay home." Pearl shook her head. "I just heard. It's terrible." "Do you think it means there will be more raids?" Maggie sighed, leading Pearl toward the back room where crates of new merchandise awaited unpacking. "Hard to say. The treaty's been holding for the most part, but there are always young warriors who don't feel bound by the chief's promises. And with the drought this year, supplies are scarce for everyone." As they worked sorting calico, coffee, ammunition, and the 100 other items needed for frontier life, Pearl found herself repeatedly distracted by thoughts of the Peterson family and of Stone Callahan riding back to the Rocking M with his grim news. "You're a million miles away today," Maggie observed, breaking into Pearl's thoughts. "Something on your mind besides the raid?" Pearl felt a blush creep up her neck. "Just worried about what it means for everyone." Maggie's knowing eyes saw too much. Hum. "And your distraction wouldn't have anything to do with a certain tall foreman who rode in covered in dust and determination this morning, Maggie?" "Of course not." Pearl busied herself with counting tins of peaches. "I barely know Mr. Callahan." "But you'd like to." Maggie's tone was gentle. "Can't say I blame you. Samuel Callahan is one of the few men around these parts worth a second look. Educated too, from what I hear, despite his rough riding ways." Pearl sighed. "It doesn't matter. Men like him don't court women like me. Women like you, Maggie's eyebrows rose. You mean intelligent, courageous women who speak their minds. You know what I mean. Half the town thinks I'm scandalous just for working at the saloon. The other half thought I was peculiar even before that, with all my reading and unwomanly opinions. Maggie set down the bolt of fabric she was measuring and placed her hands on Pearl's shoulders. Listen to me, Pearl Wilson. Your father raised you to think for yourself, and your mother, God rest her soul, would be proud of how you've survived since losing him. Don't let this town's small minds make you small too. Pearl's eyes stung with unexpected tears. Thank you, Maggie. I just get tired of fighting sometimes. Of course you do, honey. We all do. Maggie gave her a quick hug. Now, let's finish this inventory before my husband comes back and thinks we've been gossiping all morning instead of working. By noon, they had completed most of the inventory, and Maggie insisted that Pearl take home a basket of fresh bread and preserves as partial payment for her help. As Pearl left the store, the street was busier than earlier, with people going about their business despite the morning's unsettling news. She was nearly back to her house when she heard hoofbeats approaching rapidly from behind. Turning, she saw Stone Callahan riding toward her, his horse moving at a controlled but urgent pace. He reined in when he reached her. "Miss Wilson," he said, tipping his hat. "Heading home," Pearl nodded, surprised by his appearance. "I thought you'd be back at the ranch by now." Change of plans. McAllister's bringing the herd in closer to town for safety. I came back to arrange for extra hands to help. His eyes fell on her basket. "That looks heavy. May I escort you the rest of the way?" Pearl hesitated. Being seen in Stone Callahan's company would certainly start tongues wagging, but the genuine concern in his eyes won out over her caution. "Thank you. It's not much further." Stone dismounted in one fluid motion and fell into step beside her, leading his horse. Up close, she could smell the leather of his saddle, the dust of the trail, and something else, a clean, masculine scent that was uniquely his. "How is Mr. Peterson doing?" she asked to break the silence. "Holding his own, according to Doc Walker. Peterson's a tough old bird. If infection doesn't set in, he might pull through." They walked a few more steps before Stone spoke again. "I heard you've been helping Mrs. Sullivan at the store today." Pearl glanced at him in surprise. "News travels fast. Small town," he shrugged. "People notice where you go." There was something in his tone that made Pearl wonder if he meant people in general or himself specifically. Before she could decide, they reached her small adobe house. "This is me," she said unnecessarily, stopping at the gate in the low stone wall that surrounded her tiny yard. "Thank you for the escort, Mr. Callahan." Stone looked at the modest house with its swept dirt yard and the carefully tended cactus garden. "Your father built this place, didn't he?" Pearl nodded, a familiar ache filling her chest. "Yes." "He wanted something that would stay cool in summer and warm in winter. Said the adobe reminded him of the missions in California where he grew up." Stone's expression softened slightly. "He talked about California sometimes when he was teaching me. Said the ocean there was bigger than a man could comprehend." The mention of her father's teachings caught Pearl by surprise. "You studied with him often?" "Every Saturday for a winter when I first came to work for McAllister. I could read some, but your father taught me proper grammar and history. Said a man should know where he came from to know where he's going." Pearl felt tears threatening again and blinked them back. "That sounds like him. He believed education was the great equalizer." Stone nodded, his eyes moving from the house back to Pearl's face. "He was right about that. And about a lot of other things, I expect." A moment of understanding passed between them, a recognition of shared respect for the man who had shaped Pearl's life and, apparently, touched Stone's as well. The silence was broken by shouts from the direction of Main Street. Stone's posture instantly changed, alert and wary. "Stay here," he said, handing her the basket. "Lock your door." Before Pearl could protest, he had swung back onto his horse and was riding toward the commotion. Ignoring his instruction, she placed the basket on her porch and followed on foot, her heart pounding with apprehension. By the time she reached Main Street, a crowd had gathered outside the sheriff's office. In the center stood Sheriff Davis, Stone Callahan, and a man Pearl recognized as a scout who sometimes worked for the Army. "The patrol from Fort Bowie was ambushed in Devil's Canyon," the scout was saying, his voice carrying in the tense silence. "3 soldiers dead, the rest retreating back to the fort. The Apache band is larger than we thought, maybe 20 warriors." Murmurs of fear rippled through the crowd. Pearl pushed forward until she could see better, drawing disapproving glances from some of the town's more respectable women. "What are we supposed to do now?" demanded Harold Simmons, the banker. "Wait here to be slaughtered in our beds?" "Nobody's getting slaughtered," Sheriff Davis said firmly. "We'll organize additional patrols. Every able-bodied man will take shifts." "I'll ride to the surrounding ranches," Stone offered. "Let them know what's happening, get more men to help defend the town if needed." The scout shook his head. "Too dangerous for one man to ride alone right now." "I'll take my chances," Stone replied. "McAllister's men need to know, and so do the other spreads." Pearl watched his face as he spoke, struck by the calm authority he projected. While others panicked, Stone Callahan assessed and acted. It was a rare quality in a world where bluster often substituted for courage. As the meeting broke up, with men heading to collect weapons and Sheriff Davis organizing patrol schedules, Pearl found herself once again face to face with Stone. "I thought I told you to stay at your house," he said, but there was no real anger in his voice. "I'm not very good at following orders, Mr. Callahan," she replied. To her surprise, a genuine smile broke across his face, transforming his features. "So I'm learning, Miss Wilson." Before she could respond, Pike and his Diamond T companions shouldered their way through the dispersing crowd. Pike's face was flushed with drink despite the early hour, and his eyes held a mean gleam when they landed on Pearl. "Here she is, Boys the Wildcat herself. Bet she's in league with those Apache. Always did have unnatural ideas about people knowing their place." Pearl felt her temper flare, but before she could speak, Stone stepped between them. "You're drunk, Pike. Go sleep it off before you say something that gets you hurt." Pike sneered. "Defending her honor again, Callahan. Didn't figure you for the type to take interest in damaged goods." The words struck Pearl like a physical blow. It wasn't the first time she'd heard such insinuations, but having them hurled in public, in front of Stone, made the shame burn hotter. Stone's response was so quick that Pearl barely saw him move. One moment Pike was sneering, the next Stone had him by the collar, his face inches from the other man's. "Apologize to the lady," Stone said quietly. The calm in his voice was more frightening than any shout. Pike struggled ineffectively. "Let go of me, you son of a—" Stone's grip tightened. "That's not an apology." Fear finally penetrated Pike's alcohol-fueled bravado. "Sorry," he muttered. "To Miss Wilson," Stone clarified, not releasing his hold. Pike turned his head slightly toward Pearl. "Sorry, Miss Wilson." Stone released him with a slight push that sent Pike stumbling back into his companions. "Now get out of here. And if I hear you speaking about Miss Wilson that way again, an apology won't be enough." The Diamond T Cowboys retreated, Pike muttering threats under his breath that no one took seriously. Pearl stood frozen, a mixture of mortification and gratitude rendering her momentarily speechless. Stone turned to her, concern evident in his eyes. "Are you all right?" Pearl managed a nod. "Yes." "Thank you. Although I'm capable of defending myself, you know. I know, he said simply, but you shouldn't have to. Not against that kind of talk. Something in his certainty, the absence of doubt about her worth or character, touched Pearl deeply. Most men in town either believed the worst about her or didn't care enough to defend her reputation. "Mr. Callahan," she began, not entirely sure what she wanted to say. "Stone," he corrected. "My friends call me Stone." The simple offer of familiarity brought a smile to her lips. "Stone, then." "And I'm Pearl." He nodded, the ghost of his earlier smile returning. "Pearl." He said her name as if testing how it felt on his tongue. "It suits you." Their moment was interrupted by Sheriff Davis calling Stone's name. "If you're still planning to ride out to the ranches, best do it now while there's plenty of daylight left." Stone acknowledged the sheriff with a nod before turning back to Pearl. "Will you be all right in town, with everything that's happening?" The genuine concern in his voice warmed her. "I'll be fine. I've dealt with worse than rumors of Apache raids." His expression turned serious. "This is more than rumors, Pearl. Promise me you'll be careful. Stay close to town, keep your doors locked at night." "I promise," she said, touched by his worry. "And you be careful out there." The scout was right, it's dangerous to ride alone. Stone's eyes held hers for a moment longer than necessary. "I'll be back by tomorrow. Try to stay out of trouble until then." As she watched him stride toward the livery stable, Pearl realized with a jolt of surprise that she was already counting the hours until his return. It was a dangerous feeling, allowing herself to care about a man who had merely shown her basic decency. And yet, there was something about Stone Callahan that suggested depths beyond his quiet exterior, something that resonated with her in a way no one else in Copper Creek ever had. With a sigh, Pearl turned toward home, aware that several townspeople had witnessed her exchange with Stone and were already whispering among themselves. Let them talk, she thought with newfound defiance. For once, she didn't care what they said about her. The tension in Copper Creek heightened as evening approached. Men with rifles patrolled the streets, and families locked their doors earlier than usual. Pearl had volunteered to help at Doc Walker's clinic, preparing bandages and medicines in case they were needed. The doctor's wife, Martha, welcomed the assistance without the judgment Pearl often faced elsewhere. "You have steady hands," Martha observed as Pearl carefully measured laudanum into small bottles. "My mother was a midwife back east. She always said you could tell a good healer by their hands." Pearl smiled at the compliment. "My father wanted me to become a teacher like him, but I always thought nursing might suit me better. I like helping people in practical ways." "You'd make a fine nurse," Martha agreed, "though I suppose opportunities for training are limited out here." "Practically non-existent," Pearl admitted. "And my current position isn't exactly conducive to pursuing a respectable profession." Martha's kind eyes held no censure. "Life takes unexpected turns, especially for women without family to support them. You've done what you needed to survive, Pearl." "There's no shame in that." Before Pearl could respond, the clinic door burst open and two men carried in a third whose leg was bleeding profusely. "Apache ambush at Miller's Creek," one of the men gasped. "Jim here took an arrow, 3 others dead." Pearl moved instantly to help, grabbing clean cloths and water while Doc Walker examined the wound. For the next hour, she assisted as the doctor removed arrow fragments and stitched the ragged flesh. The injured man, a cowhand from a nearby ranch, remained mercifully unconscious throughout the procedure. "Will he live?" Pearl asked when they had finished, and the patient rested under the influence of laudanum. Doc Walker nodded tiredly. "If infection doesn't set in." "You were a great help, Miss Wilson. Where did you learn to assist like that?" "My father had medical books. I used to read them and practice bandaging techniques." She didn't add that she'd had plenty of practical experience, too, patching up her father during his final illness when they couldn't afford the doctor's regular visits. As Pearl washed blood from her hands, she couldn't help worrying about Stone, somewhere out in the darkness carrying warnings to isolated ranches. The thought of him encountering the same Apache band that had attacked at Miller's Creek made her stomach clench with fear. "You should go home and rest," Martha said gently. "You look exhausted." Pearl nodded, suddenly aware of how drained she felt. "Send word if you need me again. I'll come right away." The night air had cooled considerably as Pearl made her way home, escorted by one of the town's volunteer patrolmen. The streets were eerily quiet, with only the occasional glow of a lantern from a watchman's post breaking the darkness. Inside her small house, Pearl lit a lamp and checked that her doors and windows were secure. The events of the day had left her too restless for sleep, so she selected one of her father's books, a volume of Tennyson's poetry, and settled into the rocking chair beside the stove. The familiar words brought comfort, transporting her momentarily from the dangers surrounding Copper Creek to the mythic world of Camelot and noble knights. She wondered if Stone had ever read Tennyson, then smiled at herself for the thought. She was behaving like a schoolgirl with her first infatuation, not a grown woman who knew better than to dream about cowboys with storm-gray eyes. Despite her determination to remain practical, Pearl's thoughts continued to drift to Stone as she finally prepared for bed. She said a silent prayer for his safety before blowing out her lamp, the darkness bringing with it both vulnerability and the strange comfort of knowing that the same stars watching over her were watching over him too, wherever he might be riding in the night. The next morning brought news that the Apache band had attacked another outlying farm before apparently moving north toward the mountains. The family had escaped by hiding in their root cellar, but their home had been burned. Sheriff Davis organized wagons to bring them and other isolated settlers into town for safety. Pearl spent the morning at the clinic again, helping Martha prepare the schoolhouse as temporary housing for the displaced families. As she arranged bedding and sorted donated supplies, she kept glancing toward Main Street, hoping for some sign of Stone's return. By midday, there was still no word from him or the other riders who had gone to warn the ranches. Pearl tried to quell her growing anxiety by focusing on her tasks, but Martha noticed her distraction. "Waiting for someone in particular?" she asked kindly as they folded blankets together. Pearl felt her cheeks warm. "Just worried about all the men who rode out yesterday." "It's been almost 24 hours. Martha's knowing smile suggested she wasn't fooled by the general concern. "Stone Callahan can take care of himself, dear. He's been riding these hills for years and knows every hiding place and water source. If anyone can evade trouble, it's him." Pearl abandoned any pretense. "Have you known him long?" "Since he first came to work for McAllister about 8 years ago. He was younger then, of course, but already had that serious way about him. Your father saw something in him right away, insisted on teaching him properly when he found out Stone could barely read." "He mentioned that my father taught him," Pearl said. "I had no idea they were so well acquainted." Martha nodded. "Jonathan was very proud of Stone's progress. Said he had one of the quickest minds he'd ever encountered once he got the fundamentals down." This new information about Stone only increased Pearl's fascination with the quiet cowboy who had twice come to her defense. What other depths lay behind his reserved exterior? Her musings were interrupted by shouts from outside. Pearl rushed to the schoolhouse door to see a group of riders coming down Main Street. Relief flooded through her when she recognized Stone's broad-shouldered figure at the head of the column. The riders stopped at the sheriff's office, where a crowd quickly gathered to hear their news. Pearl joined the onlookers, trying not to be too obvious in her scrutiny of Stone. He looked exhausted, with several days' worth of stubble darkening his jaw and dust coating his clothes, but he appeared uninjured. McAllister and the other big ranchers are moving their herds to the high pastures where they're easier to defend, Stone reported to Sheriff Davis. They've sent most of their hands with us to help protect the town until the army can dispatch more troops. Any sign of the Apache band that hit Miller's Creek? The sheriff asked. Stone shook his head. Nothing fresh. Looks like they're heading for the Dragoon Mountains like you heard. Probably returning to their stronghold there. As the crowd dispersed, and the newly arrived cowboys headed for the saloon to wash the trail dust from their throats, Stone's eyes found Pearl in the crowd. The intensity of his gaze made her breath catch. He handed his horse's reins to another rider and made his way toward her, removing his hat as he approached. "Miss Wilson," he said formally, aware of the curious eyes watching them, "I trust you've been keeping safe." "I have," she replied, equally formal though she wanted to throw propriety aside and express how relieved she was to see him unharmed. "And I see you've returned in one piece, despite the dangers." Something like amusement flickered in his tired eyes. "As promised. Though I could use about 3 days' sleep and a proper bath." Pearl smiled, suddenly conscious of how disheveled he must feel. "Then I won't keep you. I'm sure you have many things to attend to." Stone hesitated, then lowered his voice. "Would it be too forward to call on you properly tomorrow?" "Once I've made myself presentable." The unexpected invitation sent a wave of pleasure through Pearl. "Not too forward at all. I would welcome the visit. Then I'll come by in the afternoon if that's agreeable." His expression remained serious, but Pearl could detect a warmth in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "Very agreeable," she confirmed, aware that several townswomen were watching their exchange with undisguised interest. Stone replaced his hat and offered a slight bow before rejoining his companions. Pearl watched him go, unable to suppress the smile that threatened to split her face. Samuel Stone Callahan wanted to call on her properly. It was the last thing she had expected when this eventful day began. As Pearl turned to resume her duties at the schoolhouse, she nearly collided with Harriet Jenkins, the banker's wife and one of the town's most dedicated gossips. My, Harriet said with false sweetness. "Mr. Callahan seems quite taken with you, Pearl. How surprising." Pearl lifted her chin. "Is it surprising that a man might enjoy conversation with a woman who can string together complete sentences, Mrs. Jenkins?" Harriet's eyes narrowed. "I merely meant that Mr. Callahan is known for his discerning nature. He rarely shows interest in women with certain reputations." The barb was delivered with precision, but Pearl refused to show how deeply it stung. How fortunate that Mr. Callahan forms his own opinions rather than accepting gossip as fact. "Good day, Mrs. Jenkins." Pearl walked away with her head high, though her hands trembled slightly. Harriet's implication was clear: someone like Stone shouldn't be interested in someone like her. It was the same judgment Pearl had faced since taking the job at the saloon, the same dismissal of her character based on circumstances rather than truth. For the first time in a long while, however, Pearl found herself caring what others thought. Not because she believed their opinions had merit, but because she worried their poisonous whispers might reach Stone and influence him against her before they'd had a chance to truly know one another. The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity as more displaced families arrived in town. Pearl worked alongside Martha until evening, grateful for the distraction from her own thoughts. When she finally returned home, she was too exhausted to do more than wash quickly, eat a simple meal, and fall into bed. Her last conscious thought before sleep claimed her was of Stone's face, tired but determined, and the quiet promise in his eyes when he'd asked to call on her. Pearl woke the next morning with an unfamiliar feeling of anticipation. Stone would be visiting today. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. What would they talk about? Would he still find her interesting when they had the chance for a real conversation? And most importantly, what were his intentions? She chided herself for such girlish fretting. At 24, she was hardly a debutante awaiting her first caller. Still, as she went about her morning chores, Pearl found herself taking extra care with her appearance. She washed her copper hair until it gleamed and pinned it in a style more elaborate than her usual practical arrangement. After considerable deliberation, she chose her best dress, a moss-green cotton that her father had once said matched her eyes. By early afternoon, Pearl had cleaned her small house until it shone, arranged wildflowers in a jar on the table, and fretted herself into a state of nervous energy. When a knock finally came at her door, she had to take a deep breath to calm her racing heart before answering. Stone stood on her porch, hat in hand, looking more rested than when she'd seen him yesterday. He'd shaved and his dark hair was still damp from washing. Instead of his trail-worn work clothes, he wore a clean white shirt, dark vest, and his best denim pants. The effect was striking, still unmistakably a working cowboy, but one who had made every effort to present himself well. "Good afternoon, Miss Wilson," he said, his deep voice carrying a hint of the same nervousness Pearl felt. "Good afternoon, Mr. Callahan. Please come in." She stepped aside to allow him entry, suddenly aware of how small and modest her home must appear to someone accustomed to the sprawling Rockingham ranch. If Stone found her home lacking, he showed no sign of it. Instead, he looked around with genuine interest, his gaze lingering on the bookshelves that lined one wall. "Your father's collection?" he asked. Pearl nodded. "And some that were my mother's. Books were always prized possessions in our household." Stone approached the shelves, his fingers trailing reverently over the spines. "I remember this one," he said, carefully removing a volume of Shakespeare. "Your father had me read passages aloud to practice my diction." The image of a younger Stone struggling with Shakespeare's complex language brought a smile to Pearl's lips. "Which play did you prefer?" "Macbeth," he answered without hesitation. "Though your father said my temperament was more suited to Horatio from Hamlet." The loyal friend who survives to tell the tale. Pearl's estimation of Stone rose even higher. How many cowboys in the Arizona Territory could discuss Shakespeare with such easy familiarity? "Would you like some coffee?" she offered, suddenly remembering her duties as hostess. "I baked some bread this morning as well." "That would be mighty welcome," Stone said, returning the book to its place. "Though I don't want to put you to any trouble." "It's no trouble at all." Pearl bustled to her small kitchen area, grateful for the chance to collect herself. Stone's presence filled her modest home in a way that was both unsettling and exciting. As she prepared the coffee, she could feel his eyes on her back. "I heard you've been helping at the clinic," he said. "Doc Walker speaks very highly of your assistance." Pearl turned, pleased by the compliment. "I enjoy the work. It feels purposeful, not like serving drinks at the Silver Dollar." The question held no judgment, merely understanding. "Exactly." Pearl brought the coffee to the table, along with a loaf of fresh bread and some preserves. "Though I'm grateful to Hank for the job. There aren't many options for a woman alone in a town like this." Stone took the seat she indicated, waiting for her to sit before reaching for his coffee. The simple courtesy spoke volumes about his upbringing. "Have you ever considered other possibilities?" he asked. "With your education and abilities, you could do many things." Pearl sighed. "It's not so simple. I've thought of teaching like my father, but the school board made it clear they consider me unsuitable." The memory of that rejection still stung. And leaving Copper Creek would mean abandoning my father's house, the last connection I have to my parents. Stone nodded thoughtfully. Roots matter. I understand that better than most. Something in his tone suggested a story, and Pearl found herself intensely curious. Did you grow up in the territory? A shadow crossed Stone's face. No, I was born in Missouri. My father had a small farm there. He paused, seeming to debate how much to share. He was killed in the war fighting for the Union. My mother tried to keep the farm going afterward, but it was too much. She died of pneumonia when I was 14. I'm so sorry, Pearl said softly, moved by the matter-of-fact way he described such personal tragedy. Stone shrugged slightly. It was a long time ago. After she passed, I headed west, worked my way through Kansas, Colorado, New Mexico. Took whatever jobs I could find. Was barely literate until I landed at the Rockingham, and your father took an interest in my education. The revelation of Stone's difficult past gave Pearl new appreciation for what he had accomplished. Rising to foreman of one of the territory's largest ranches after such beginnings spoke to exceptional character and determination. And now, she asked, what are your ambitions now? Stone met her eyes directly. I've been saving. McAllister's getting older, talks about selling pieces of the ranch. I aim to buy a section when he does start my own spread. The clarity of his vision impressed Pearl. While many cowboys drifted from job to job, living for Saturday nights and payday celebrations, Stone had a plan for his future. That's admirable, she said sincerely. Not many men look so far ahead. And you, he asked, his gray eyes intent on her face. What does Pearl Wilson want from life if she could have anything? The question caught her off guard. It had been so long since anyone had cared about her dreams that she had almost stopped acknowledging them herself. I'd like to use my mind, she said finally, to help people in meaningful ways. Maybe become a proper nurse with training or open a school that accepts all children, regardless of background. She hesitated, then added with a self-deprecating smile, and I'd like to stop being known as too loud and too much trouble. Stone's expression softened. Those who say such things about you don't know you at all. And you do? The question slipped out before Pearl could censure it. I'm beginning to, he replied, his voice low and sincere. I know you're educated but not pretentious, brave but not foolhardy. Kind to those who need help, regardless of what others might think. He paused, a slight smile touching his lips. And yes, you speak your mind more freely than most women in these parts, but I consider that a virtue, not a fault. Pearl felt warmth spread through her chest at his words. How long had it been since someone had seen her so clearly, had valued the very qualities others criticized? Why did you ask to call on me, Mr. Callahan? She asked, needing to understand his intentions. Stone, he reminded her gently. And I called on you because I've admired you from afar for longer than you might guess. Your courage in facing this town's narrow judgments, your devotion to your father during his illness, the dignity with which you've carried yourself despite everything. You noticed all that. Pearl was genuinely surprised. She had never seen Stone at the saloon before that day with Pike, had barely been aware of his existence except as a name mentioned in town gossip. I notice more than people think, he said simply, and I'd like the chance to know you better if you're willing. The honest declaration, free from flowery compliments or exaggerated promises, touched Pearl deeply. Stone Callahan was offering genuine interest, not fleeting attraction. I'd like that too, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. They looked at each other across the table, a moment of perfect understanding passing between them. Then Stone cleared his throat and reached for his coffee, breaking the intensity of the moment. Tell me about your mother, he said. Your father spoke of her sometimes, but never in detail. For the next 2 hours, they talked easily, sharing stories of their pasts and thoughts about the future. Pearl found herself laughing more than she had in years as Stone recounted tales of his early days as a cowhand, learning the hard way about the dangers of proud bulls and the stupidity of young steers. In turn, she told him about growing up as a teacher's daughter, always expected to be the example for other children, and her mother's secret love of dime novels that she would read aloud to Pearl when her father was occupied with school matters. "I should go," Stone said finally, noticing the lengthening shadows. "People will talk if I stay much longer." "People will talk regardless," Pearl replied with a touch of resignation. "But you're right. We both have responsibilities tomorrow." As Stone rose to leave, he hesitated, then reached for her hand. His palm was calloused from years of rope and reins, but his touch was gentle as he raised her fingers to his lips in a gesture more courtly than Pearl would have expected from a cowboy. "Thank you for this afternoon," he said, his eyes holding hers. "May I call again?" "I would be disappointed if you didn't," Pearl answered truthfully. At the door, Stone turned back. "There's a social at the church next Saturday. Would you consider attending with me?" The invitation startled Pearl. Church socials were respectable gatherings, attended by all the proper families in town. For Stone to escort her so publicly was a significant statement. "Are you certain?" she asked. "Some people might not approve." Stone's expression hardened slightly. "I don't much care what some people think. I'd be honored to escort you, Pearl Wilson, if you'll have me." The determination in his voice left no room for doubt. Whatever Stone's feelings for her, he wasn't ashamed to acknowledge them openly. "Then yes," she said, feeling as though she was stepping into unknown territory. "I would be pleased to accompany you." After Stone had gone, Pearl sat in her rocking chair, trying to make sense of the afternoon's revelations. Samuel Callahan, respected foreman, self-educated reader of Shakespeare, man with plans and principles, was interested in her. Not as a saloon girl or an object of momentary desire, but as a woman of substance worthy of public courtship. For the first time in years, Pearl allowed herself to hope for a future different from the lonely path she had resigned herself to walking. It was a dangerous feeling, hope. It left one vulnerable to disappointment. But as she watched the sunset paint the desert in shades of fire and gold, Pearl decided that some risks were worth taking. News of Stone Callahan calling on Pearl Wilson spread through Copper Creek with the speed and ferocity of a wildfire. By the time Pearl arrived at the saloon for her evening shift the next day, the whispers had reached a crescendo. "Heard Stone Callahan spent the entire afternoon at your house yesterday," Hank remarked as Pearl tied on her apron. "Man must be touched in the head. Or maybe he's just after what every other man wants from a saloon girl." Pearl stiffened. "Mr. Callahan is a gentleman, which is more than I can say for most men who frequent this establishment, including its owner." Hank had the grace to look abashed. "Now don't get your feathers ruffled. I'm just saying it's unusual is all. Stone's always been particular about his reputation." "Then perhaps you should consider that his interest suggests I'm not what this town believes me to be," Pearl replied, her voice steady despite the hurt Hank's insinuation had caused. The evening proved challenging as customer after customer made comments about Stone's visit. Some were merely curious, others openly suggestive. Pearl maintained her dignity throughout, refusing to satisfy their prurient interest with details of a conversation that felt too precious to share with such unworthy ears. Near closing time, the batwing doors swung open to admit Pike and his cronies from the Diamond T. They were already drunk and looking for trouble. Pearl silently cursed her luck as Pike spotted her and made a direct line for where she stood behind the bar. "Well, if it isn't Callahan's woman," he slurred, leaning on the counter. "Here you've moved up from serving drinks to serving the Rockingham foreman. Mighty fine promotion." Pearl ignored the crude implication. "What can I get you, Mr. Pike? Assuming you can still stand upright long enough to drink it." Pike's face darkened at her calm dismissal. "You think you're better than the rest of us now that Stone Callahan's taken a shine to you. Still just a saloon girl putting on airs." "That's enough, Pike," Hank intervened, surprising Pearl with his defense. "You want to drink, fine. You want to cause trouble, take it elsewhere." "Since when do you protect her honor?" Pike demanded. "Everyone knows what she is." "She's my employee," Hank replied firmly. "And you're disrupting my business, so drink up or get out." Pike glared but backed down, muttering obscenities as he rejoined his friends at a corner table. Pearl gave Hank a grateful nod before continuing her duties, though she remained acutely aware of Pike watching her with malevolent eyes. When her shift ended, Pearl was relieved to see that Pike and his companions had finally left. She changed out of her work dress into her regular clothes and said goodnight to Hank, who gruffly warned her to be careful walking home. The night air was cool against her skin as Pearl made her way down the darkened street. Most of the town was already asleep, with only a few lights still burning in scattered windows. She quickened her pace, suddenly aware of how vulnerable she was alone at this hour. The sound of footsteps behind her confirmed her fears. Pearl glanced back to see Pike following her, separated from his friends and moving with purposeful unsteadiness in her direction. "Thought you could humiliate me in front of everyone," he called. "Twice now you've made me look the fool with Callahan jumping to your defense like you're some kind of lady." Pearl walked faster, her heart racing. Her house was still 2 blocks away. Too far if Pike intended harm. "I'm talking to you." Pike's voice was closer now. "Or are you too good to speak to ordinary men these days?" Pearl spun to face him, deciding that confrontation was safer than showing fear. "Go home, Mr. Pike. You're drunk and making a spectacle of yourself." Pike's laugh held no humor. "A spectacle? That's rich coming from you. The whole town knows what you are. Callahan will tire of you soon enough once he gets what he wants." "You know nothing about Mr. Callahan or me," Pearl replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Now leave me alone or I'll scream loud enough to wake the sheriff." Pike lunged forward suddenly, grabbing her arm. "Nobody would believe you anyway. Saloon girl crying wolf against a respectable ranch hand. Who do you think they'd side with?" Terror coursed through Pearl, but she refused to show it. Instead, she brought her knee up sharply, connecting with Pike's groin just as her father had once taught her to do if threatened. Pike doubled over with a howl of pain, releasing her arm. Pearl didn't wait to see if he recovered. She lifted her skirts and ran, not stopping until she reached her front door. Her hands shook so badly she could barely work the key in the lock. Once inside, she barricaded the door with a chair and sank to the floor, trembling with delayed fear and fury. Part of her wanted to cry, but a stronger part refused to give Pike the satisfaction of her tears, even in private. Instead, she made herself a cup of strong tea and sat by the window with her father's old shotgun across her lap, watching for any sign that Pike had followed her home. He didn't come, and eventually exhaustion overcame vigilance. Pearl fell into a troubled sleep in her chair, waking at dawn with a stiff neck and renewed determination. Pike's actions had only strengthened her resolve not to let the town's judgment define her. If Samuel Callahan could see beyond her circumstances to the woman beneath, then perhaps others could too, and those who couldn't weren't worth her concern. The next few days passed without incident. Pike seemed to be avoiding the saloon, for which Pearl was grateful. She saw Stone only once, when he rode through town with several Rockingham hands, but he tipped his hat to her with such warm regard that Pearl felt the gesture like a physical touch. As Saturday approached, Pearl found herself increasingly nervous about the church social. It would be her first public appearance with Stone, and she knew every eye in town would be watching them. While she had attended church regularly since childhood, she had never been to one of the socials, assuming she wouldn't be welcome among the more respectable townswomen. On Saturday morning, Pearl carefully pressed her best dress and arranged her hair in a modest but becoming style. She polished her only pair of good shoes and found her mother's lace handkerchief, carrying it as both a practical item and a talisman of courage. Stone arrived precisely at 3 o'clock, looking uncomfortable but handsome in a clean dark suit that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. His hat was freshly brushed, and he'd trimmed his hair, revealing more of the strong lines of his face. "You look beautiful," he said simply when Pearl opened the door. "Thank you." She felt a blush warm her cheeks. "You're quite handsome yourself." Stone offered his arm with formal courtesy. "Ready to face the lion's den?" The question acknowledged the scrutiny they would face without suggesting retreat. Pearl appreciated his honesty and his determination to proceed anyway. "As ready as I'll ever be," she replied, taking his arm. They walked to the church together, Stone shortening his stride to match hers, his solid presence beside her a comfort against the stares of those they passed. As they approached the white clapboard building, Pearl could see clusters of townspeople already gathered on the lawn where tables had been set up for refreshments. Conversation faltered as they arrived, and Pearl felt the weight of dozens of curious eyes. She lifted her chin and smiled, refusing to appear apologetic for her presence. Reverend Thompson approached them first, his wife beside him. "Mr. Callahan, Miss Wilson, welcome." If the minister was surprised to see Pearl on Stone's arm, he hid it well. "The ladies have outdone themselves with the refreshments this year." "It all looks wonderful," Pearl said sincerely. "Thank you for organizing such a lovely gathering." Mrs. Thompson beamed at the compliment. "Why, thank you, dear. We're so pleased you could join us. It's been too long since we've seen you at a social function." The acceptance, however perfunctory, eased some of Pearl's tension. She and Stone moved among the tables, accepting lemonade and cookies while exchanging polite greetings with other attendees. Some, like Maggie Sullivan, were genuinely welcoming. Others, particularly Harriet Jenkins and her circle, offered thin smiles that didn't reach their eyes. "Quite a spectacle you're creating," Harriet murmured as she passed Pearl. "One wonders what Mr. Callahan hopes to gain by such a public display." Before Pearl could respond, Stone's hand pressed reassuringly against her back. "Mrs. Jenkins," he said, his voice carrying just far enough to be heard by those nearby. "I hope you're enjoying the fine weather. Pearl and I certainly are. There's nothing like good company to make a beautiful day even better." The deliberate emphasis on Pearl's name and the clear implication that he found her company preferable to gossip left Harriet momentarily speechless. She recovered quickly, but the damage to her intended barb had been done. "Indeed," she managed before hurrying away to rejoin her allies. Pearl looked up at Stone with gratitude. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," he replied quietly. "Not for your sake, you're perfectly capable of handling Harriet Jenkins, but for my own. I won't stand by while anyone disrespects a woman I care about." The simple declaration of care, spoken so openly in public, sent warmth spreading through Pearl's chest. Before she could respond, they were approached by Matthew McAllister himself, Stone's employer and owner of the Rockingham. "Stone," McAllister greeted him with a firm handshake. "Good to see you cleaned up decent for once." His eyes moved to Pearl, assessing but not unkind. "Miss Wilson, I don't believe we've been formally introduced, though I knew your father slightly. Fine man, excellent teacher." "Thank you, Mr. McAllister," Pearl replied. "My father spoke highly of you as well." McAllister nodded, seeming pleased by the response. "Stone tells me you've been helping at the clinic during all this Apache trouble. Shows good character, pitching in like that." Pearl was touched by the unexpected praise and by the knowledge that Stone had spoken of her to his employer. "I only did what anyone would do in such circumstances." "Not everyone," McAllister corrected. "Takes courage to step up when needed." He turned back to Stone. "Don't forget we're moving the North herd on Monday. Need you back at the ranch tomorrow to help with preparations." "I'll be there," Stone assured him. After McAllister moved on, Pearl noticed a subtle shift in the gathering's atmosphere. The ranchers' public acknowledgement of her seemed to have granted a kind of permission for others to approach. Soon, she and Stone were engaged in conversation with several couples who had previously kept their distance. As the afternoon progressed, children organized games on the church lawn and someone produced a fiddle. Impromptu dancing began, with couples forming sets for a Virginia reel. "Would you care to dance?" Stone asked, offering his hand. Pearl hesitated only briefly before accepting. "I should warn you, I'm not very practiced." "That makes two of us," Stone admitted with a wry smile. "But I reckon we can manage to avoid trampling each other's feet too badly." They joined the line of dancers, and Pearl was pleasantly surprised to discover that Stone moved with more grace than his cowboy boots might suggest. His hand on hers was firm but gentle, guiding rather than controlling as they weaved through the pattern of the dance. When the music shifted to a waltz, Stone drew her closer, maintaining a respectful distance while still creating a sense of intimacy between them. "Still worried about coming today?" he asked quietly. Pearl shook her head. "No. Whatever they may whisper later, I'm glad to be here with you now." Stone's eyes darkened with an emotion Pearl couldn't quite name. "I heard about what happened with Pike the other night," he said, his voice tightening. "Hank told me when I stopped by the saloon yesterday." Pearl missed a step in surprise. "You went to the saloon?" "To see you," he acknowledged. "But you were helping Martha Walker with something. Hank mentioned Pike had been causing trouble." His jaw clenched visibly. "Did he hurt you?" "No," Pearl assured him quickly. "He grabbed my arm, but I convinced him to let go." A brief smile touched Stone's lips. "I don't doubt it." "Still, he had no right to follow you or put hands on you. I've spoken to Sheriff Davis about it." The idea that Stone had taken action on her behalf without first confronting Pike directly impressed Pearl. Many men would have sought personal revenge rather than official justice. "Thank you," she said, "though I fear it may only make him more resentful." "Pike's being transferred to the Diamond Titicus holding in New Mexico," Stone replied. "McAllister spoke with his boss after hearing what happened. He won't be troubling you again." Pearl was stunned by the extent of Stone's intervention and by McAllister's willingness to involve himself on behalf of a saloon girl he barely knew. "You did all that for me." Stone's expression grew serious as the dance brought them together again. "I would do considerably more to ensure your safety and peace of mind, Pearl Wilson." The simple declaration, spoken without dramatic flourish but with absolute conviction, touched Pearl deeply. No one since her father had shown such concern for her well-being or gone to such lengths to protect her. As the afternoon faded into evening and lanterns were lit around the churchyard, Pearl found herself surrounded by more genuine acceptance than she had experienced in years. Not everyone had warmed to her presence. Of course, Harriet Jenkins and her circle maintained their distance, but many others had followed McAllister's lead in treating her with respect. When it came time to leave, Stone escorted Pearl home through streets silvered by moonlight. They walked in comfortable silence, Pearl's hand resting in the crook of his arm. At her door, Stone removed his hat, turning it in his hands in a rare display of uncertainty. "I hope today wasn't too difficult for you." "It was one of the nicest days I've had in a very long time," Pearl answered truthfully. "Thank you for inviting me." Stone's expression softened. "I'd like to court you properly, Pearl, if you're willing. No hiding, no apologies for being seen together. Just a man calling on a woman he admires greatly." The formal request, so characteristic of Stone's straightforward nature, brought a smile to Pearl's lips. "I would like that very much." For a moment they stood looking at each other in the gentle darkness, the air between them charged with unspoken possibilities. Then Stone leaned forward slowly, giving Pearl ample time to step away if she wished. Instead, she tilted her face up to his, accepting the invitation. His lips met hers in a kiss that was gentle yet confident, a perfect reflection of the man himself. Pearl felt something unlock within her chest, a door opening to feelings she had guarded carefully for too long. When Stone finally pulled back, his eyes held a warmth that made Pearl's breath catch. "Good night, Pearl Wilson," he said softly. "I'll call on you before I leave for the ranch tomorrow." "Good night," she whispered, reluctant to end the moment but aware of propriety's demands. Inside her house, Pearl touched her fingers to her lips, still feeling the impression of Stone's kiss. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a future filled with something more than mere survival, a future that included love, respect, and a partner who saw her true worth. The thought was as frightening as it was exhilarating. To hope was to risk disappointment. Yet as Pearl prepared for bed, she found herself embracing that risk with a lightness of spirit she had almost forgotten was possible. The next few weeks established a pattern that gradually became familiar to the residents of Copper Creek. When Stone was at the Rockingham, he rode into town every few days specifically to see Pearl. When ranch duties kept him away longer, he sent brief notes with supply wagons, not flowery declarations, but thoughtful observations that revealed his growing feelings. For her part, Pearl found unexpected allies in her changing circumstances. Martha Walker invited her to assist more regularly at the clinic, providing a respectable alternative to some of her saloon shifts. Maggie Sullivan offered her occasional work at the general store. Even Hank grudgingly reduced her hours, seeming to understand that Pearl's association with Stone Callahan had altered her standing in the community. Not everyone approved, of course. Harriet Jenkins and her circle continued to whisper behind their hands whenever Pearl passed. Some of the older ranchers questioned Stone's judgment in courting a saloon girl, regardless of her father's former position in the community. But the most vocal critics were silenced when Matthew McAllister himself began tipping his hat to Pearl when their paths crossed in town. One crisp October morning, Pearl was helping Martha organize medical supplies when Stone appeared at the clinic door. His unexpected presence during what should have been a busy workday at the ranch brought Pearl immediately to her feet. "Is something wrong?" she asked, searching his face for signs of trouble. Stone shook his head, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Nothing's wrong. In fact, I have news. Good news, I hope." He glanced at Martha. "Could I borrow Miss Wilson for a short walk, madam?" Martha waved them away with a knowing smile. "Take all the time you need. We're nearly finished here anyway." Outside, the autumn air carried the scent of sage and distant wood smoke. Stone offered Pearl his arm, leading her toward the edge of town where the desert stretched toward distant mountains. "You're very mysterious this morning," Pearl observed, curiosity building. "What news couldn't wait until your regular visit?" Stone's expression was more animated than she had ever seen it. McAllister's selling off the north section of the Rockingham 3,000 acres, including water rights to Cottonwood Creek. Pearl's heart quickened as she began to understand. "And you're buying it," Stone nodded, a rare grin transforming his usually serious face. "Signed the papers this morning. It's not much compared to the full Rockingham, but it's good grazing land with reliable water, enough to start building something of my own." "Stone, that's wonderful." Pearl squeezed his arm in excitement. "Your own ranch, the dream you've been working toward all these years." "There's a cabin already built," he continued, his eyes alight with plans. "Nothing fancy but solid, good foundation for something more substantial eventually." He paused, turning to face her directly. "The thing is, Pearl, I don't want to build that future alone." Pearl's breath caught as Stone reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object wrapped in clean handkerchief. With deliberate care, he unwrapped it to reveal a simple gold ring set with a small but perfect emerald. "This was my mother's," he said, his voice deepening with emotion. "The only thing of value she managed to keep after my father died. She made me promise to give it only to a woman strong enough to face life's hardships without losing her spirit." His eyes held Pearl's with unwavering intensity. "I can't imagine anyone more deserving of it than you." Pearl felt tears gathering as Stone took her hand in his. "I'm not a man of fancy words, Pearl Wilson, but I love you. Your courage, your kindness, your refusal to be less than who you truly are despite what others might say. I want to build a life with you if you'll have me." The simple, heartfelt declaration touched Pearl more deeply than any elaborate proposal could have. This was Stone honest, steadfast, seeing her true worth when others saw only what they expected to see. "Yes," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, I'll have you, Samuel Callahan. I love you too." Stone's hands trembled slightly as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit as if it had been made for her, the emerald catching the morning light in flashes of green fire. Their kiss was deeper than their first, filled with the promise of a shared future and the certainty of having found in each other something rare and precious. When they finally parted, Stone kept his arms around Pearl, as if reluctant to break the connection between them. "People will talk," he said with a small smile. "More than they already do." Pearl laughed, a sound of pure joy. "Let them. We know the truth, that's all that matters." They walked back toward town together, Pearl's hand securely in Stone's, the morning sun glinting off her ring. By noon, news of their engagement had spread throughout Copper Creek, eliciting reactions that ranged from genuine congratulations to scandalized murmurs. Pearl was hardly surprised when Harriet Jenkins cornered her outside the general store later that day, her face pinched with disapproval. "So you've managed to trap Stone Callahan into marriage," Harriet said, eyeing the ring on Pearl's finger with ill-concealed envy. "I suppose congratulations are in order, though one does wonder how long such an unusual match will last." Before Pearl could respond, Maggie Sullivan appeared beside her, placing a protective arm around her shoulders. "Oh, I think it will last a good long while, Harriet. True love has a way of enduring, especially when it's built on mutual respect rather than social convenience." She smiled sweetly. "Now, if you'll excuse us, Pearl and I have wedding plans to discuss." As Harriet flounced away, Pearl turned to Maggie with gratitude. "Thank you for that, though I fear you've just volunteered to help plan a wedding." Maggie laughed. "Nothing would please me more. That man looks at you like you're the sunrise after the longest night of the year. It's about time this town had something joyful to celebrate." The weeks leading up to the wedding passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Stone divided his time between establishing his new ranch and courting Pearl, with a dedication that gradually silenced even the most persistent critics. The transformation in their relationship, seemed to mirror a broader change in how Pearl was perceived by the community, no longer too loud or too much trouble, but a woman of substance worthy of respect. Pearl reduced her hours at the saloon even further, spending more time at the clinic where her natural aptitude for nursing had become increasingly valued. Doc Walker had even begun suggesting she consider formal training someday, a possibility that excited Pearl more than she had expected. The wedding was set for the first Saturday in November, when the cattle work would be less demanding, and the weather still mild enough for an outdoor celebration. To Pearl's surprise, Reverend Thompson had readily agreed to perform the ceremony at the church, stating that any union built on such evident devotion deserved proper blessing. On the morning of her wedding day, Pearl woke early in her father's house, knowing it would be the last day she spent there as Pearl Wilson. Tomorrow she would ride to Stone's new ranch, their ranch, as Mrs. Samuel Callahan. The thought filled her with a mixture of excitement and bittersweet nostalgia. As she prepared for the ceremony, Maggie and Martha arrived to help, bringing with them a gift that brought tears to Pearl's eyes: her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved and altered to fit her. "How did you find this?" Pearl asked, running her fingers over the delicate lace trim. "I thought it was lost years ago. Your father gave it to me for safekeeping before he died," Maggie explained. "He said I'd know when the time was right to return it to you." The revelation that her father had planned so far ahead, believing in a future where Pearl would find happiness even when she herself had doubted it was possible, filled her heart with renewed gratitude for the man who had raised her to be strong and independent. With Maggie and Martha's help, Pearl dressed in the ivory gown that had been her mother's proudest possession. Her copper hair was arranged in an elegant knot adorned with desert wildflowers, and around her neck she wore a simple silver locket containing miniature portraits of her parents. "You look beautiful," Martha said, adjusting the fall of the skirt. "Stone won't know what hit him." Pearl smiled, feeling more serene than she had expected on this momentous day. "I just hope my father would have approved." "Approved?" Maggie squeezed her hand. "Pearl, he would have been overjoyed. Stone Callahan was one of his favorite pupils, not just for his quick mind, but for his character. Jonathan used to say that boy would make something extraordinary of himself one day." The church was filled to capacity when Pearl arrived. It seemed the entire town had turned out, whether from genuine goodwill or simple curiosity. As she prepared to walk down the aisle alone, a poignant reminder of her parents' absence, Matthew McAllister approached her. "Miss Wilson," he said, his gruff voice unusually gentle, "I was wondering if you might allow me the honor of escorting you. I know I'm a poor substitute for your father, but Stone is like a son to me, which makes you family too." The unexpected offer brought fresh tears to Pearl's eyes. "I would be honored, Mr. McAllister." With the rancher's steady arm supporting her, Pearl entered the church to find Stone waiting at the altar, his tall frame resplendent in a new suit. The look on his face when he saw her, a mixture of awe, love, and absolute certainty, erased any lingering doubts Pearl might have harbored about their future together. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of emotion. Pearl was only vaguely aware of the congregation watching as she and Stone exchanged vows, their voices clear and unwavering in the hushed church. What she would remember most clearly later was the warmth of Stone's hands holding hers, the depth of conviction in his "I do," and the gentle way he kissed her when Reverend Thompson pronounced them husband and wife. The celebration afterward spread from the churchyard to the main street of Copper Creek, growing increasingly festive as the day progressed. To Pearl's amazement, even Harriet Jenkins offered stiff congratulations, though her husband's more genuine good wishes suggested he, at least, had come to appreciate the match. As evening approached, Stone sought out his bride where she stood chatting with Martha Walker. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Callahan?" he asked, the new name bringing a glow to Pearl's cheeks. "Home," she repeated, savoring the word. "Yes, I believe I am." They said their goodbyes amid cheers and well wishes, mounting the horses Stone had prepared for their journey. The 3-hour ride to their new ranch would bring them there before full dark, the first of many journeys they would make together. As they left Copper Creek behind, Pearl felt a chapter of her life closing, the lonely years of struggle and judgment giving way to something new and full of promise. She glanced at Stone riding beside her, his profile strong against the setting sun, and knew with absolute certainty that she had found where she belonged. "Having second thoughts?" Stone asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. Pearl shook her head, smiling. "Just the opposite. I was thinking how fortunate I am that you saw past what everyone else believed about me." Stone reached across the space between their horses to take her hand. "I saw you, Pearl. The real you. Not too loud or too much trouble, just exactly right." The simple affirmation, spoken with such conviction, washed away the last lingering echoes of the whispers that had followed Pearl for so long. In their place grew the certainty that she had found not just a husband, but a partner who valued her exactly as she was, voice, opinions, spirit, and all. As they crested the final hill, and their new home came into view, a sturdy cabin nestled among cottonwoods beside a gleaming creek, Pearl felt her heart expand with joy and possibility. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she and Stone would face them together, building a life defined not by others' expectations but by their own shared dreams. The sun slipped below the horizon as they rode the final distance, painting the desert in shades of purple and gold. Pearl Wilson Callahan lifted her face to the emerging stars. No longer too loud or too much trouble, but simply, perfectly, herself, loved and valued by the man who had seen her true worth all along.